Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we'll find out who Staro is. Among the vast catalog of strange, monstrous, and deeply disturbing creatures that have emerged both from the classic pages of comics and their cinematic adaptations, there is one name that resonates with particular strength within the DC universe: Starro the Conqueror. We are not talking about an ordinary enemy or a fleeting villain. What we face is an alien entity that breaks every known mold. At first glance, its appearance might seem almost innocent, that of a gigantic cosmic starfish. But beneath that facade hides one of the most calculating, ruthless, and dangerous intelligences ever conceived, endowed with a terrifying power that makes it an adversary impossible to ignore: the ability to subjugate and control the will of other living beings. That ability not only places it above countless adversaries, but also elevates it as the absolute leader of its species, a whole race of parasitic organisms whose sole purpose is to expand without limit across the universe, multiplying like an unstoppable plague. Thus, Starro is not only a threat to humanity, but also to some of the most powerful heroes that exist, including none other than the Justice League itself. In recent times, this colossal creature has returned to popular culture thanks to the movie The Suicide Squad, 2021, directed by James Gunn. There, we saw in lavish detail just how majestic, strange, and at the same time terrifying it can be. Its ability to invade the minds of its victims and turn them into mere puppets reaffirms it as one of DC's most memorable villains, a monster that terrifies not only for its size, but for what it represents: the absolute loss of free will. And that is precisely what we will do in this video: travel through the history of Starro the Conqueror. We will begin by reviewing how we first saw it on the big screen through Gunn's vision, dissecting step by step what happened in that story. Then we'll go back to its first appearances in the comics, exploring its origins, which, mind you, are not limited to a single version. Later, we'll dive deep into its alien biology, the most disturbing aspects of its mind and personality, and close with a review of its most unusual and lesser-known powers, those that make it an enemy practically impossible to defeat. The movie presents Starro in a dark context, linked to the horrors of the Cold War. The story begins when a group of American astronauts finds it floating in Earth's orbit. Upon discovering it, they decide to capture it and bring it back to Earth with the hope of studying it and using its biology as a military resource. However, that decision would mark the beginning of a nightmare. During the return trip, Starro detected the threat posed by its captors and unleashed part of its power: tiny replicas of itself, small starfish that attached directly to the astronauts' faces, completely taking over their thoughts, emotions, and actions. When the capsule landed on our planet, the United States government immediately understood the devastating potential of this being. Instead of destroying it, they chose to hide it and make it the centerpiece of a secret program. Thus, a dark pact was born with the military dictatorship of the fictional nation of Corto Maltese. There, in a German-origin fortress known as Jotunheim, the base for the experimental project was established, given a name as sinister as it was suggestive: Project Starfish. The scientist appointed to lead it was Gaius Greaves, better known by his alias, the Thinker. His role was to investigate, dissect, and understand how Starro worked. And to achieve this, he did not hesitate to resort to inhuman methods. He used political prisoners of the Herrera regime, men and women unjustly imprisoned, and even children, all turned into living guinea pigs. Starro was forced to feed on the life, energy, memories, and consciousness of those innocent victims. For decades, that cruel exploitation not only made it grow physically, increasing its size until it became a colossal monster comparable to a kaiju, but also planted in it a visceral hatred of humanity. 30 years of torture, confinement, and experimentation had transformed Starro into a monstrous, imposing creature marked by human suffering and boundless ambition. But its fate would take a brutal turn with the arrival of Task Force X, the Suicide Squad, in Corto Maltese. The official mission was to erase any trace linking the US government to that Inhuman project. However, the explosions they themselves triggered in the Jotunheim facilities unleashed what everyone feared: Staro's liberation. And its first action, after regaining freedom, was one of pure vengeance. With a single movement, it ended the life of Dr. Gaius Greaves, the man who had studied and tortured it for so many years. Then, it destroyed the tower that had kept it captive for decades and launched itself with all its fury toward the nearest city. At every step, Starro left behind a trail of panic, destruction, and death, unleashing an unstoppable power that made it a threat worthy of the darkest science fiction tales. At this point in the story, the tension reaches its absolute climax. What had begun as a covert and chaotic mission ends up revealing a confrontation no one had foreseen: the army of Corto Maltese and the Suicide Squad itself, forced to fight a creature that seems invincible, a cosmic titan whose mere presence crushes all hope of victory. Starro, freed after decades of torture and seething with rage from the horrors it suffered, bursts into the city as an unstoppable force. Its colossal body covers the skies, and from its massive flesh pours a torrent of spores, tiny stars that float like cursed ash over buildings and streets. This cloud of living organisms spreads like a plague, darkening the light and tinting the air with an aura of despair. Each spore seeks a new host, a face to cling to erase its will and add it to the Conqueror's enslaved army. And then, with a cavernous voice filled with hatred and an arrogance impossible to ignore, Starro proclaims its dominion. This city, this territory, this entire people now belong to it. Every person, every life, every corner of Corto Maltese is its own. And this is not a threat. It is a declaration of ownership. The resistance quickly reacts. The army throws everything it has at its disposal. Entire squads fire without pause. Machine guns spit endless bursts. Explosives detonate in the creature's midst, and even heavy artillery joins the assault. But nothing can stop it. Bullets bounce off its skin like raindrops on a cliff. Bombs barely leave superficial marks on its body, and the flames engulfing it seem only to enrage it further. Starro advances with the devastating calm of a storm, like a starfish-shaped hurricane that obliterates everything in its path, with nothing and no one able to stand in its way. And yet, amid this apocalyptic scene, the tide begins to turn. The Suicide Squad, dysfunctional yet unpredictable, becomes the city's last and only hope. Ratcatcher 2 summons her personal army, an endless horde of rats emerging from every sewer, every crack in the streets, every forgotten corner. Millions of tiny creatures swarm the alien colossus, climbing its arms and legs, burrowing into its wounds, sinking into its flesh and devouring it from within like a silent and ravenous army. Starro's pain is indescribable, and its roars shake the city as if they were earthquakes. And it is at that very moment, when the beast writhes and staggers under the rodent's assault, that Harley Quinn once again demonstrates her calculated chaos. With almost feline agility, she climbs the ruins of a destroyed building, performs an impossible somersault, and, wielding a spear, furiously drives it through the creature's gigantic eye. The blade pierces the organ as if it were liquid crystal, releasing a torrent of fluids while Harley, smiling wildly, delivers the final blow. Brutally and poetically at the same time, the Suicide Squad achieves what seemed impossible, bringing down the Stellar Titan and ending Starro's threat in the Suicide Squad, 2021. The cosmic beast falls defeated, its ice slowly fading, and with it the mental dominion over all those it had enslaved. However, to truly understand the magnitude of this villain, it is not enough to remain on the big screen. We must go back to its origins, to the comic panels that brought it to life. Starro debuted in March 1960 in The Brave and the Bold number 28, and not in just any way. It was the first great enemy faced directly by the Justice League of America. That is to say, Starro was not merely a villain, but the catalyst for something much greater, the union of Earth's most powerful heroes. In those early stories, Starro appears with the same purpose that defines it to this day, an intergalactic conqueror whose sole objective is to bring the entire universe under its control. We learn that it is not a solitary being, but part of an alien species known as the Starro Conquerors, a race designed for domination. Its method is terrifying in its simplicity. It releases replicas in the shape of small stars that cling to the faces of its victims, erasing all freedom and turning them into extensions of its will. Under its control, individuals cease to exist as people and become interchangeable pieces of a slave army. But its threat goes beyond slavery. Classic tales show Starro draining entire planets, stripping every resource, exhausting their life energy until they are left as empty husks. And most disturbing of all, many times it does this from afar, sending hordes of replicas while it remains millions of kilometers away, coldly watching the progress of its dominion. To understand the level of its power, on more than one occasion, Starro has managed to control even Superman himself. Not even the Man of Steel's strength was enough to resist its parasites, and only the unity of the entire Justice League could free him. For feats like these, Starro has been considered one of the greatest and most formidable threats in the entire DC universe, and in a way, the indirect cause of the League's formation as an official group. Over the decades, the character evolved and its mythology expanded. In 2011, with the editorial reboot of the New 52, it was given a much deeper and more sinister background. There we learned that its origin traces back to a strange planet, almost a cosmic anomaly, where different species coexisted in a state of eternal war. Among them, the one that eventually prevailed was the race of the Starro. After millennia of evolution, they developed a society governed by a hive mind, a central queen who controlled each individual as if they were mere extensions of its will. Under its rule, the species expanded without limit, conquering worlds, devouring resources, and absorbing the memories of entire civilizations. Their passage through the universe was devastating. Planets turned into graveyards, cultures erased as if they had never existed, worlds reduced to absolute silence. During one such campaign of conquest, the Starro reached the planet Hattori. At first glance, its inhabitants seemed primitive, without advanced technology, living simple lives shaped by a spiritual connection with nature. But what made them unique was not their science, but their telepathic gift. All Hattori shared thoughts, memories, and emotions in a vast collective network, as if they were a single organism with thousands of bodies. When a gigantic alien star appeared in their sky, the harmony of that people was broken. Starro released its drone parasites, which clung to the faces of the Hattori, subjugating their bodies, as it had done on so many other worlds. But this time something different happened. Although physically dominated, the Hattori's telepathic network remained intact. That connection became an invisible shield, a collective bond that resisted complete submission. It was as if the very essence of the entire people refused to surrender, keeping their will alive from within the minds of the enslaved. This resistance not only surprised Starro, but revealed that even a seemingly absolute power could find limits against the unity and shared memory of a people. Thus began a desperate race, a battle against time in search of a way to end that impossible being. The air was thick with tension, and Starro's shadow seemed to darken not only the planet's sky, but also the hopes of all who resisted its dominion. Amid that chaos, the unexpected figure of a young man emerged. Andres, brother of Kobe, the protagonist of this story. Unlike so many others who had fallen, Andres achieved what seemed unthinkable, breaking Staro's mental control. It was a flash of pure willpower, an act of resistance no one else had managed, and at the moment he regained control of his body and mind, he took the weapon at hand, a heavy, rudimentary axe, and without hesitation, charged toward his destiny. His goal was clear: the newly born queen, destined to replace the dying matriarch. If he could destroy her before she grew, perhaps the planet Hathor would have a chance to survive. The comics reveal that the original queen was already in her decline. Her aged body would not endure much longer, and so she had chosen the planet Hathor as the ideal cradle for her successor. It was a young, primitive world, with societies lacking advanced technology, and, therefore, unable to defend themselves against the cosmic threat looming over them. For Staro, Hathor was a perfect breeding ground, a planet that could be consumed slowly, sacrificing its life and energy to nourish the rise of the new queen. But tragedy came swiftly. Andres' attempt was as brave as it was brutal, but also desperately doomed to fail. Just as he raised his axe to deliver the fatal blow to the creature, the young queen struck back with the deadliest weapon in her arsenal: mind control. In a cruel and twisted move, she invaded the mind of her own brother Kobe, forcing him to commit the unthinkable. With a vacant gaze turned into the queen's puppet, Kobe raised his weapon and beheaded Andres with his own hands. That moment marked a before and after. The horror of committing such an act ignited something within Kobe. The trauma of killing his own brother, though forced to do so, shattered the queen's mental control. With a scream of fury and pain, Kobe tore from his face the star parasite that had enslaved him. The queen, in a last desperate attempt to subjugate him, lunged at him, but the result was unexpected. Her body did not consume him. Instead, it fused with his chest, embedding itself like a living second skin. And that was when everything changed forever. Kobe not only resisted, but gained absolute dominion over the queen, and with it, over the entire Staro species. From that moment on, the stories describe how Kobe's tale transformed into that of a conqueror. Under his command, the Staro race no longer acted as a blind hive, but as a conscious army, with a human general at its head. Every creature, every parasite, and every replica obeyed his orders without question. With that uncontrollable force, the race embarked on an unrestrained expansion, subjugating civilization after civilization, erasing entire planets from the star maps. However, that victory came at a devastating cost. Kobe, still a child, began absorbing the strength, memories, and intelligence of millions of enslaved beings. Every conquest made him stronger, but also burdened him with a torrent of emotions, voices, and accumulated hatred. His body changed, warped, and grew. His mind ceased to be that of a child and became a turbulent ocean of alien wisdom and human resentment, until finally emerging as a titan, an entity no longer human, adopting a name that instilled terror: Starro the Conqueror. Kobe understood that sooner or later, the entire universe would fall under his shadow. It is here that the comics pause to invite us to look more closely at the origins and physiognomy of this cosmic creature. Staro is described as a colossal starfish, a biological form both recognizable and disturbing due to its dimensions and its unique, enormous eye, always open and shining at the center of its body. That eye, shifting between reddish and yellowish tones, becomes its most iconic and terrifying feature. Its skin, on the other hand, has the ability to change color, from deep blue to intense purple, a camouflage it can use both to intimidate and to adapt to its surroundings. In the film The Suicide Squad, this design remains faithful to the comics, though enhanced with its own nuances, a more organic texture, a blend of bluish and pinkish tones that reinforce the paradox the character embodies. Because Starro is, at the same time, majestic and monstrous, beautiful in its strangeness and terrifying in its essence. The main difference lies in the narrative. In the comics, Starro is an implacable conqueror, a galactic predator whose sole purpose is to enslave and expand. In the film, however, it is given a far more tragic nuance. We are not shown it as a villain who seeks conquest out of ambition, but as a being that was once free, that only wished to gaze at the stars and the immensity of space. Its hostility does not stem from a desire to dominate, but from the cruelty it suffered at the hands of humans, captured, tortured, and manipulated for more than 3 decades, first by astronauts, and later by the sadistic scientist known as the Thinker. That is why, in the movie, it becomes clear that Starro's rage is not gratuitous. Its pleas to characters like Colonel Rick Flag, Ratcatcher 2, and Peacemaker reflect that desire for liberation. And when it finally escapes, it does so driven by hatred fed by pain. It wants the world to feel what it endured. It wants to return the suffering that marked it. That is why it unleashes all its fury upon the people of Cordo Maltese. As an extraterrestrial creature, Starro is a threat of cosmic scale. In the comics, it is described as a being whose brute strength approaches dangerously close to Superman's, though without surpassing it completely. Its most fearsome ability, however, lies not in its physical strength, but in its power of reproduction. It can generate countless tiny clones of itself, parasites shaped like stars that cling to the faces of victims and erase their free will. Its colossal size makes it an almost indestructible titan. It can withstand explosions, artillery fire, energy beams, and even blows from top-tier heroes. Added to this is a chilling regenerative capacity. It can heal deep wounds within seconds and even reconstruct itself from a tiny fragment of its body. In some stories, it is also granted telekinesis, allowing it not only to move and fly through the cosmos, but also to manipulate objects and enemies at will. But among all its abilities, the most terrifying is its massive mental control. Although it usually employs its parasites, it does not always need them. In certain stories, it is capable of dominating entire populations solely with its psychic power, and in extreme cases, it has been shown influencing beings thousands of light years away. Furthermore, some comics describe it absorbing cosmic energy and releasing it as devastating attacks or altering entire ecosystems through strategic use of its parasitic drones. Of course, like every monster, it also has weaknesses. The comics mention that common substances, such as lime or certain chemicals that affect terrestrial starfish, can seriously harm it. Low temperatures and ice have also proven to be lethal weapons against it. And in the cinematic version, its ultimate downfall comes in one of the most unexpected ways. The rats of Ratcatcher 2, who manage to penetrate its body from within and seal its fate. Thus, Starro embodies the paradox of great monsters in fiction. While representing an unstoppable and terrifying force, its story also reveals a victim of human ambition and cruelty.